So welcome to Big Book Compendium. Um, so open your, take your big book and just open it up to open the cover. Just open the cover to where it's not the title page, but just the cover of the book. The very first thing. Some of your books you might have your name in there, a bunch of phone numbers. Some of it might be blank, and it's the blank I want to cover. I want to focus on. Not if your book's not blank, don't worry about it. But it's the blank part is it's what an open mind looks like, and the open mind is very important. We'll it's kind of make full circle with this open mind thing tonight because we'll be covering it a little bit at the end too. And I also was told that when I was new, my sponsor said, "This is how much you know about recovery," and so important stuff. So we're going to go to the page that's the title page. And we're going to look at first, we're going to look at the part that says other books. And you see in the other books, it says, depending on your volume you have, third edition might be different, but fourth edition says 12 steps and 12 traditions. And it says uh, imperative, interpretive, not imperative, interpretive commentary of the AA program by a co-founder. Interpreted, means to break something down, and to a commentary is, well, an interpretive commentary means to have you know a lot of information and effort to have a deeper understanding of a subject, to explain it. Explanatory information is interpretive commentary. It does not mean it's used instead of the big book. Its sole purpose is to give you a deeper understanding of the steps. I'm not saying don't use the 12 and 12. I found out over the years from my own personal experience that when I was doing the steps and I started reading the 12 and 12, I was more confused. And it's really good that I think it's there to give you a deeper understanding after you do the steps. So it says A comes of age. Now, this was released at the same time as the second edition in 1955 at the convention. And this is actually after the convention. I'm sorry, because it's a breakdown of lots that happened there, but it's history. It's a history. And then you have, as Bill sees it, which is a typical coffee table book. And what a coffee table book is, something that is simple, that you open up and you get very simple, things in there. And Bill's story, as Bill sees it, I mean, it has like maybe a line or two from the big book or more, or the 12 and 12. And what I like about that is it's great for morning devotional because you open it up and you see, oh, I'm going to read more about that. And it gets you more into the big book, especially at the beginning. So it's doesn't have dates or anything in there, but it's a good book. And plus it gives you information like Bill's letters he wrote and Grapevine's writings and stuff, as well as that. It's derivative from a book that I'll mention in a few minutes called The Best of Bill. They kind of came out at the same time. So anyways, I'll get back into that in a minute. But Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers is another history book. This is told from the Akron perspective. Excellent book, excellent history book. And then Pass It On. The one thing I want to mention about A Comes of Age, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and Pass It On is they're written by Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And Bill and Bob in those books, they're not writing it, they use ghostwriters, but they're giving their information, their input and stuff. But it's very politically correct. There's no controversial stuff in there about Bob or Bill. And they were kind of controversial individuals. If you read the unauthorized biographies of Bill, the ones that I trust, you find a lot more about Bill and what went on in the early days than they're going to put in these AA books, which is fine. And then Daily Reflections is a devotional with dates and stuff in there and everything, and that's amazing because, again, like Bill sees it, you have a big book line in there. It might get you more into the big book or the 12 and 12. Experience, Strength, and Hope is a really good book. I'm not big on it's all the stories from the back of the book in the one. I said this before. I love the first edition stories. Second edition stories were not as great, but still some excellent ones in there. Third edition kind of started to kind of be more fellowship-ish, and the fourth edition was more like, you know, they had to have representation of all different types of people in there. So that's the route they went, and it kind of watered it down a little bit. Came to Believe is a good book. It's very newcomerish. It's very, it's a step two book. It's good. Living Sober, it's the one book I'll say belongs in Alcoholics Anonymous that I would throw out the window of my car. I think it's a horrible book. And I'm very harsh on it because it was, I know why it was put out. It was put out for the typical person that doesn't want to do the steps, that has their own outlook on recovery, that it contradicts in the big book a lot. It talks about where you're not supposed to go and where you're not supposed to do. And it's just, I understand why it's there. People don't want to do the steps. Maybe that's the book for them. I think it makes a better doorstop than a book. So, that's just my opinion. AA in Prison, Inmate to Inmate, was not one of my favorite books at first because I read a couple of stories and I was like, this is typical stories. And then I started going into the prisons doing volunteer work. And I met the AA guys there. And it's interesting in the prison how they do the steps. Because how can you do a fifth step in a prison when you're not really supposed to, have deep, intimate conversations like that? What they do in the prisons are they have a first step group, and that's run by the guys who've done the steps. And they're in the advanced group, and then then there's a group that does the second and third step. And then they have a 4-step workshop. And then they kind of do their fifth steps, behind closed doors, so to speak. Some, they don't get bugged, and a lot of the guards don't understand what they're doing, as far as step work. I mean, the fifth step. Um, so, but they get it done, and then once you get that done, you go to 6, 7, 8, and 9 class, and then once you're in that for a while, you go to 10, 11, 12. Once you go to 10, 11, 10, 11, once you go to 12, you go back and teach the groups. And these guys I met in the prison, in San Quentin prison out here in California, I was blown away of their knowledge of the big book. I really was blown away how well they knew it, their passion for it. And I could imagine what their fifth steps are like. You can imagine, one thing I want to mention is it on a.org, you can get Pass It On, Dr. Bob, and the Good Old Timers, A Comes of Age, in the first edition big book reprint for $30. It's like a $60, $70 value. So I just want to mention that. I'm going to put up here on the wall other books that I've read outside of the ones they're not going to put in here. So probably the most popular one that's Non-Alcoholics Anonymous is 24 Hours a Day, written by AA members. It's really old. I actually have one from the 40s that was my wife's grandfather's. It's a very interesting book. I mean, it has a lot of great morning devotional. It's more deeper than Daily Reflections. So actually, yeah, no, it wasn't the 40s. It came out in 54. And then Language of the Heart, it's a newer book, but it's all Bill Wilson's grapevine writings. And excellent book. Gives you a deeper understanding of some of the stuff Bill was trying to get across. And you can kind of see his change, from his depression aspects and his change in thinking going through that book. And then the one I mentioned, The Best of Bill, it's all the writings he did. And it was supposed to go deeper than Bill sees it, but for whatever reason, I don't know what happened, but they discontinued it. But you can find it. I would highly recommend it. I don't have it, but I've been able to glance through it, and it's an amazing book. I think the reason they discontinued it was because the interviews he did in there weren't with AA groups or AA official, and they were done by outside, radio and this and that, and not radio, but you know what I mean, like just outside groups, and then writings he did personally, and for whatever reason they discontinued it. Um, and the other one is called The Great Responsibility. It's Bill's General Service Conference talks from 1951 to 70. You can find that. The one book in here that is very interesting is the Little Red Book. Came out in 1948. Is written, I can't, he goes by Anonymous, but I can't remember his name. He's an A guy. Bill Wilson, anyone that got as big as him, that came up after him, he was kind of jealous of those people, like Clarence Snyder and stuff. And um, this Little Red Book is much like the 12 and 12, as per each step. Um, if you buy it, I would probably recommend to make sure you're getting an original copy and not the Hazelton one, because they took God out of it. But you can find an original copy that's a reprint for like $5 on Amazon. But what happened was, to give you the backstory really quick, is AA wanted to make the Little Red Book because of its popularity. It's a study guide with the big book. It was hand in hand with it, but it went deeper on the steps. And they were going to make it official AA literature because of its popularity. And then Bill was working on a 12 Traditions book, and he did not want someone to beat him to the punch on a book. So he said, I'll do 12 Traditions if I can do 12 steps in that book. So they came out with that, and they had no need for this guy's book. So he sold the Hazelton, and they edited it up. But you can still get original copy. Very good book. New Pair of Glasses, Chuck C. Highly recommend it if you haven't read it yet. Awesome book. Drop the Rock by Bill C. This book really, I mean, I probably read it 5 or 6 times. And they also have Drop the Rock for step 10 too, for letting go in step 10, 6 and 7, and really, really good book. A Program for You is you've probably seen it. It has, like, it's yellow and blue kind of stripes across, and I don't know if they still make it or not, but what happened is rehab started listening to Joe and Charlie tapes during the 80s. And they're, if you know who Joe and Charlie were, the guys who did kind of started this whole book study craze, how to really break down the book. And Joe and Charlie, they were listening to them in rehabs. And so some of the rehabs would say, hey, can you guys do a program for us, or, workbooks? So they did. And years later, Joe, they will do recovery dynamics, or Joe would, but Program for You has a pocketbook, I mean, like a 12 and 12 size book, and 3 workbooks. And it's really, really good. It's really good. It really broadens your understanding of the steps, but it's really good. It's a really good one. The steps we took also by Joe McQuaney, or Joe McHugh, whatever you want to call him. And Joe, this is from an interview with him. He wasn't really a writer, so they would interview him. And actually, I'll be honest, I like his book better than the 12 and 12, just because it's more personable with AA members, and the way it gets down to the steps and how to do stuff. It's not as it's just different. It's a different take, and I really, really helped me at the beginning. Carry the Message is another book that's very good by him. Back to Basics by Wally P. His step working is a little different than I'm used to, but I like his history and stuff he does. So it's a must to buy if you're interested in history, and just to know. I mean, it's based on the Back to Basics they did in the 40s when AA was being outnumbered like 100 to 1 by new members coming in. So they had to do group sponsorship, and that's what this is kind of based off of. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to close that up for now. And so if you look at the title page, and you're going to see, the name Alcoholics Anonymous, and, the origins of the name Alcoholics Anonymous come from the title of, the book, of course, this book, not the fellowship. A lot of people have tried to tell me that, and it's not the case. And if you're new in AA, you walk in the first time, you might think that, because when you think of Alcoholics Anonymous, you think meetings. That's what I did. And then, hey, there's this big book, and I didn't know even the title of the big book was Alcoholics Anonymous. But if you look to the side, it says how the story of, on that page, story how many thousand men and women have recovered. It's the first promise of the big book. Actually, I'm going to go back to sharing now again. I should have left it open. But we're going to look at this very closely. So the story how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And this is a 4th edition picture right here I have up. So let's look at the first part where it says the story. The story. So a story is a narrative, and it's a message that perhaps, about people or a course of events. It can be fact or fiction. And it's interesting because the word story comes from a Latin word called hysteria, which means both history and story. And so, history, if you look at that, it's a chronicle events. And what does history contain? Detailed information. When you describe something has a history, you're implying it has an intriguing past, something that has been passed down for generations. Well, this is what we're looking at here. This book has a history, thousands, millions to, it's helped to overcome alcoholism. Think about that. This story shows how to identify the problem, how to apply the solution, and how to achieve ongoing sobriety. If the word, one thing I tell people, if the word story doesn't click with you, cross it out and write directions on there. The directions, how many thousand men and women have recovered. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, now I get the point. The thing about when you put something together, it's usually best to follow each direction. When back in the day, when I would put together any type of thing that had a manual, I would put it together first and then read the manual. That doesn't work very good, because then you left with 5 screws and a board, and you're like, okay, well, what the heck happened here? And you wonder why later that it's crooked. So, Alcoholics Anonymous not only got me to truly understand everything. Everyone can see the sharing screen, right? That's up, which is the book. Okay, because it's different now than the way they usually put it up here. So we're gonna look at the next one, is the word how. Story how. How means a way or a means. Like, here's how it's done, or as we know, how it works. And another part of our how is, we hear at meetings a lot, and it's a great one. Trust God, clean house, work with others. Unfortunately, some people even that I know even say that have never trust God or cleaned house or work with others. Maybe they trust God and that's it, but they never clean house or work with others. But whatever. But it's how, and you could say it's also the selfless service. It's passing it on to those who are ready. And that's a great way to put it. And it says, the next part is many thousands of men and women. So first edition said was typical for that time. Men was supposed to describe, they used as a word to describe persons in general. Well, that's not very, good. So the original big book said the story how more than 100 men have recovered, and so they made those changes to be correct, because it is men and women. And of course, it became thousands later on. So the 100 men and women are the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the fellowship in those days looked drastically different than today, because it was more, they needed more than just companionship and fellowship. Well, they needed companionship along with fellowship. So if you go to page 17 of the book, let's see what that looks like. Let's see the point I'm trying to make is that they need something more. And I call this the page 17 warning, because it's very deep, very important too. Mm, I spilled my coffee all over myself. That's good. So, um, so on page 17, it says the feeling having shared a common peril. So the feeling having shared a common peril, another word for peril is problem. So it is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself, when that holds together, is we are now joined. So we all have the exact same problem, an allergy, right, to alcohol. You know, that's you know that's the common problem that brings us together. And you can see the obsession coupled with the allergy, allergy coupled with the obsession. But so the common problem that brings us together, and that's the unity, that's the fellowship, and that's what the first 100 men and women saw in each other. And real alcoholics, and real alcoholics, really broken alcoholics that could never have a chance of what a way out. But they also saw it was not enough, just knowing we have a common problem talking about it. They needed more. If you go down to the last paragraph there, it says the tremendous fact of each and every one of us that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree upon, in which we can join in brotherly harmonious action. Why do they agree upon it? Because they know it works, right? So there's so much that goes with that common solution. All of them have done it. The recovery rates were,
it's 10 o'clock,
in the 90s or more. They knew it worked, and that's why they could join. And the brotherly harmonious action was the awakening. So these first 100 discovered it was the common solution of 4 through 9. We didn't have 4 through 9 yet technically, but the common solution of 4 through 9, not the common problem that truly connected them. So it was their backbone, and this book is their story. Today in our fellowship is more focused on the common problem than the common solution. It's kind of cart before the horse, so it's up to us here in this room to bring it to the fellowship. They may not always like us for that. It's interesting, just the way it seems to work. And so the next part on here is have recovered from alcoholism. So first, let's look at what alcoholism is. It's not how we were raised, or that we're weak or we're sinners. It's a physical and mental serious illness. The body part, of course, is the phenomenon of craving, and when I talk about my body, I crave more. Physical reaction, that's why it's called an allergy, and the abnormal reaction to a substance. And I have a mind that condemns me to drink against my will. Reoccurring, persistent idea of drinking and doesn't respond to reason. If you have a physical and mental ailment of any kind, or here's a better way to put it: if you have a physical ailment of any kind, illness, disease, it is detrimental that you don't put certain things in your body, or don't, let's just say you're allergic to, like my son, peanuts. If he puts it in his body, he can die. He's very allergic. But he's not going to lock himself up in a hotel room at 3 o'clock in the morning, calling me for, to bring him peanut butter, because he doesn't have an obsession. It would be insane to put something in your body that is going to kill you eventually. So, that's the mental obsession. And when Carl Jung says he's never been successful as an alcoholic of your description, this is what he's talking about. Impossible to stop on our own power, powerless. It says have recovered from alcoholism. Recovered, not cured. People will tell us it means cured. No. Cured means that the allergy is gone, as well as the obsession. Recovered means the obsession has been removed, the mental part, so it won't feed the allergy. And the reason why they say recovered from a serious hopeless state of mind and body, because since the obsession is removed, it's no longer, like I said, it's no longer feeding it. It's dormant, right? but it goes deeper than that. We'll get more into that at times we go on. But the steps 4 to 9 produce that spiritual awakening to remove the obsession and new relationship with my creator that expel the obsession, and we become recovered. 10, 11, 12 help us maintain and hold on to that recovered, you know, and not recovering, grow with that awakening. Um, it doesn't say here the story of how many thousand men and women, are recovering from alcoholism. It says recovered. Recovered means restored to health. And recover and recovered, they basically mean the same. Recover and recovered. They are both about wellness. And wellness, as we know, what is it? It's the opposite of illness. Wellness has become a popular term in recovery, especially in alternative medicine, to describe a balance of the mind, body, and spirit. Um, this is a title page of Alcoholics Anonymous, yet people argue and doubt it. It is true at meetings. You can't be recovered, they say, but it's right there on the title page. I used to doubt it myself. I used to think book thumpers were crazy. And I would tell them, you can't be recovered. And I shared a meeting recently, and as soon as I said I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic, a guy yelled out, I'll be recovered when I'm dead. Okay. You know, but I was told I could never recover and that I would never be well. And um, that would always, there'd always be a fight with alcohol. That I thought that recovered meant cured. I believed it was always recovering. In that time period, I never got more than, when I had that mindset, I never got more than 10 years. In 10 years, I never got more than 3 months clean, sober, and never got past step 3, either way. Either way. It was like, even if I did step 3 in a month or 2 weeks, I would go out and get drunk. And if it 3 months didn't come up and I hadn't done it yet, I would be drunk. Um, and and plus, I mean, I went to rehab 7 times, and it was in that 7th trip to rehab that I came in very, very sick, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I had hurt lots of people, and I wanted to get well. I was done. There was no more. I looked at my recovery before. If this cup, I represent this cup as like, hypothetically, before there was a lot of holes in it the water was leaking out. As long as that water was leaking out, I'm not going to do it. It was when there was no. It was when the water was all gone. You know, all of a sudden the well would run dry. I'd lost everything. There was no one around me anymore. I came in this time to do the steps, and as a result, my obsession was removed. That warped my mind and blinded me was gone. I ceased fighting anything, anybody. Sanity returned. And this title page tells me I can be recovered. And it gives me the right to say, I am recovered. I am Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. And for that, I get attacked at meetings, and you can't be recovered. You're a step Nazi, and blah blah blah. And we're always recovering. Recovering is a state that one is in during a course of action, during the time being restored health. I'll give you an example. I've had 5 back surgeries. They're not fun. I don't recommend them. But the first surgery I had was complete reconstruction of my L4, L5, of the lower part of the back. I had a broken vertebrae and 3 collapsed discs. And so they did complete reconstruction. They went to my stomach, went to my back, went to my side, took bone off my side. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. When I went through physical therapy, it was grueling. It was grueling, and until I got to the stage of being recovered, and then I could work on getting everything back that I lost, right? I did not want to go, hey, you know what? That was fun doing recovering during that time period. I'm going to go back and do it again. No, I want to be recovered to move on with my life. And the majority of people in meetings say recovering more than recovered or recover. Recovering's in the big book twice. In the first 100 pages twice. In the family afterward, I think. And recovered is in the big book 17 times. Recover 24 times. That's 41 times restored to health is mentioned. I want to recover, and now I'm recovered, and I'm only recovering for a very short time as I'm doing the steps the first time. If someone wants to say they're recovering, that's their right, you know, between themselves. But at some point, we have to think about what's the message being sent, that we're always sick, that healing never takes place. It's all, it's always a fight. For a person attending the first AA meeting, what do they think about that? It's just my opinion. You know, so here's what the first edition. We know what the first edition looked like. You've probably seen it. It's a big yellow, you know, cover book, and the second edition. This is what it actually looked like, the first edition, and so this is without the cover. It usually has a yellow cover on it, and the it didn't have any circle and triangle. It had this little flower thing, and the second edition, and it's got the copy right here. Second edition, they added the circle and triangle. So we're going to look at what the circle and triangle is all about, right? And so first of all, it's ancient symbolism. You know, like for instance, like some of you guys obviously know what this is. It's a Celtic knot, and um, which if you look at it, goes on endlessly. But there's other forms of this. There's what we see on the American dollar bill, which is kind of creepy. And then there's ones you see in like a lot of medical, things. And there's a bunch of them very similar in their nature. And then there's like, when here in the US at least, there's manual covers, which are sewage. For sewage, you don't want to open them up. I think I did when I was a kid before, but not too far off from the sewage is the bathroom door. Oops, what happened to it? There it is. The bathroom door with a circle and triangle on it. Very interesting. So, and then there's of course the famous Illuminati, which is the conspiracy that the world's being taken over by a bunch of people. Anyways, I don't want to get into that, but that's their symbol. So let's talk about the circle, before we get into both circle and triangle. Circles are among the oldest geometric symbols, and it commonly represents many things. For instance, protection. It also represents unity. It also represents wholeness or completeness. It's all connected, right? But here's the thing that people mostly miss about the circle. It's infinite. It's ongoing. It never ends. It does not have a beginning or an end, and does not have sides or corners. So in spirituality, a circle represents supernatural motion that keeps things moving continuously. Bill liked the circle aspect because he was very frustrated with Alcoholics Anonymous step people, with their 6-step program they were doing, because these people would have a spiritual awakening, and then they would think it's everlasting, and they wouldn't go back and keep doing the steps. So he came up with step 10, and it was very important for him later on, when I'll talk about where he got this triangle from, circle and triangle, to have something that meant continuously. In Zen Buddhist philosophy, a circle represents enlightenment and perfection. And as we know, like in Christianity, you see the halos, symbol of holiness represented, by a circle of light around the head of a saint or a holy person. And then, so let's look at, that's a circle. So think of, the infinite part, and then let's look at the triangle. They're also among the oldest, geometric symbols, and commonly represent mind, body, and spirit, the 3 elements of humanity: mind, body, and spirit. And it also is past, present, and future. And then it also represents strength. And this is real interesting. Why does it represent strength? This foundation. A foundation is based, is the base for something. It's a structure, foundation. Buildings have to have a strong structural foundation. Out here, we love, in the United States, love building buildings on hills, And if it's in an area where it's by the ocean, we get mudslides and houses come tumbling down, and a lot of them had terrible foundations. That's what happens. But foundations support something. That's the most important thing to know. But pyramids, the ancient pyramids in Egypt, are the the strongest, ultimate form of strength. They have been standing for thousands of years, still standing, and will probably continue to stand for thousands of more years. The question is how and why. Because they are foundation built on foundation. Well, this way, foundation built on foundation and built on foundation, built on foundation. That's, to me, right there, the true element, essence of the triangle. It's a foundation. If you look at it that way, from the pyramid aspect, um, every level, has something above it to make it tight. So let's put this together, and then we have the circle and triangle. So if you look at it the way I explained it, you have the infinite, and then you have the foundation in there. So it's very interesting to look at it like that. And let's look at it like this: mind, body, spirit. Circle means whole or complete, right? Bill was traveling in Europe, and I believe it was 49 maybe, right around there. Let's just say 50. And what happened is he knows in the old churches, and you could probably find, churches there that still have them. I know in San Francisco, they still have some. And if you look up in the stained glass, you see a little circle. And it was meant to keep the evil spirits out, but also stood for mind, body, and spirit, and was the circle and triangle. And you see them in the corner. It was mostly for mind, body, to keep the evil spirits out of the holy place. But Bill fell in love with that circle and triangle. And what got him the most was he asked a person, I think it was a priest, what the actual circle part meant. And the guy said, well, the triangle's mind, body, and spirit, but the circle's wholeness. It means with all three, you're complete. And Bill was like, way his mind worked, click, and what he came up with was happily, usefully whole because of three legacies: unity, service, recovery, the three legacies. So the first legacy on here is unity, and which means to bring together in union, the opposite of divided, right? Think about that. Alcoholics are very divided people. Unity is our fellowship, where people share common problem, and who give love and support each other. And most of all, say welcome when you walk in. They don't lock the door or hide. They say welcome, and that's big. So for that, we have 12 traditions, and 12 traditions represent the principles by which support the unity of the fellowship at group level. So these traditions apply life. They're the lifeline for our fellowship, and they are the means by which AA maintains and grows. Also, when I think of unity, I think of union with God at the same time, or whatever you call it, higher power, universe, whatever. And the next one is service. And if you perform duties to help someone, you're providing service, free time to benefit of another. And service gives us the opportunity to apply our primary purpose, to carry the message the alcoholic still suffers. Our 12th step is carry the message, is the basic service that that the AA fellowship gives, is our principal aim, and the main reason for our existence is one alcoholic helping another. For that, we have 12 concepts, and which can be found in the General Service Manual, and of course the appendix in this big book. There's so much service out there. We we have commitments, secretary, coffee maker, and all that stuff like that. And there's also sponsorship. It doesn't really go with the concepts per se, but It's what we do. That's the main service we provide. That's giving back freely what was freely given to us. Um, and service can also be what you do outside of Alcoholics Anonymous and still connected to it in your own way, because you wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe you go to a food pantry and volunteer your time. Maybe you give out clothing, jackets like my friends and I do to the homeless people. You know, we're altruistic, selfless beings now. We're going to want more, and we're going to want to adapt into more um, the missionary style service work where you just want to help people, period. I'll call altruistic service work. So recovery refers to the process of healing after an illness or injury. It also means to obtain and get something back, like in American football, with the phrase fumble recovery, and it's used for us. Recovery means much deeper than holding a football in place. For us, it is much deeper than that. It's a state. It's receiving a higher state of God consciousness, or so you can overcome the fatal malady of alcoholism and continue to grow spiritually. It also refers to return to your natural state or original state. Say. Um, Bill Wilson referred to the recovery as freedom from alcohol. In other words, recovery is about transformation. Recovery is about changing your outlook, your thoughts, your perception to become a whole person, not just be someone who doesn't drink anymore or goes in and out of recovery. What we need for long-term recovery is emotional sobriety. And it's about having happiness and freedom. It's to live useful and have productive lives. For us, we have, of course, the 12 steps, which is pretty much what we talk about here the most. The 12 steps is the entire foundation. It really, if you did the picture I did a while back, this one, let me go back to it. If you put this one into the circle and triangle, recovery, 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 in that triangle, while the other ones help it a lot, where would they be without recovery? So these 12 steps, it's the entire foundation. Bill in AA said the 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which a practice, a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. Each legacy, has 12 guiding spiritual principles, 36 and all. There's also 12 warranties, but I don't include them on here. I mean, I just didn't for whatever reason. There's also those, and I would say look over those yourself. I get really confused by them, but that's the main ones here because they cover each line of the triangle. Circle represents wholeness. The complete symbol represents perfect union of the mind, body, spirit. We have to have all three. I just can't go to meetings on their own because my obsession will be there and I'll be a dry drunk and eventually probably pick up if I'm a real alcoholic. And I just can't just do service work because when am I going to know what it is if I'm not doing recovery? And a lot of people who I know who do 12 steps get so fed up with the fellowship, they don't do unity, so they don't do service, and they lose interest in, there's so much more they could have, and they go back out. You got to do all three. I heard a guy speak one time who had, he said, he goes, I'm such and such, and I have 3 years of sobriety. He goes, 2 years ago or 4 years ago, I had 36 years. He goes, he went back out because he lost the circle and triangle. He lost some of the parts of the triangle, and he lost the wholeness. I'll stay here for a minute. So the one thing is, the circle and triangle, it was adopted to AA in 1955 at the 20th anniversary International Convention in St. Louis. The circle and triangle as a symbol was registered as a trademark at that time. So what happened is very interesting. In the mid 80s, a problem began because the circle and triangle started to get used by outside organizations, novelty items, shirts, necklaces, book covers, treatment facilities, and of course, birthday medallions, which outside AA doesn't make their own medallions, outside companies do. And they have the circle and triangle on it. So what happened was in 1986, and this is a controversial, is a World Service contacted these outside entities who were using the circle and triangle for authorized manners and threatened to sue them. And they took taking the action to prevent its use. And of the 170 unauthorized users contacted, 2 suits were filed and both were settled. Here's the problem. In 1990, denying of the symbol to outside entities started to create very disgruntled people in Alcoholics Anonymous and the fellowship controversy. A members were getting birthday medallions with no circle and triangle and wondering why. And they were no longer on the medallions, and A members were not happy. They did, and they got even more happy. They did not like the idea once they looked into it and saw, well, hey, oh, here's the reasons why, because they're suing these people and pushing them away. And they're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be, happy, usefully whole people. And this is a spiritual program. And so people started writing nasty letters to World Service. And so in 93, to get out of this ugly situation, AA General Service quietly discontinued protecting the circle and triangle as a registered trademark, phased it out, thus letting anyone use it, which is why it's no longer official AA. And that's why the coins use it, but it's no longer in the big book. So it's not an official AA symbol, much like the Serenity Prayer. Was never AA before either, anyways. But one more part of the triangle I want to point out is the how, which is right here. And a lot of people wonder, like, what is it? What's the how mean? What is the how? And let's go to, if you go to page 568 of the book, or it's in the 4th edition at least, where it says most emphatically. If you have a different edition, it's the very first page of the spiritual appendix. So it says most emphatically. That means with considerable amount of effort. It says we is the first 100, which is to say that any alcoholic, and it does not leave anyone out, right? No one's left out of that. Most faculty would say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems. You notice there it says problems and not problem. Any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover. It does not say always recovering or recover. In the light of our experience and their experience of someone that's capable of honestly facing their problems. And they're talking about self-honesty here. And the best definition of honesty is the awareness of where I am at. Where do I stand on something? Because how often do we ignore how we really feel? And that's the honesty to talk about. What is it saying how it works? Those who don't recover, people who cannot be honest with who? Themselves. So any alcoholic capable of honestly facing these problems in life or experience can recover. And life or experience can recover, here's a condition. Provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. So this is very important here. A closed mind cannot get fed, which means you're not letting anything in. I remember earlier at the beginning, when I did the blank page at the beginning, the symbol of that blank page was very simple. It was to show you that this is what you can have, right? If you're open-minded. This is an open-minded program, which means to consider someone else's opinion other than your own. They're saying be open-minded to all concepts, spiritual concepts. A good example of spiritual concepts are Course of Steps, but there's also saying other spiritual concepts, right? What they're saying here is we're not here anymore to pick apart religion or make excuses about the religion and all that stuff like that. Be open-minded to it. Be open-minded to the word God. It's, it's not the God that it may not be the God that you've envisioned your whole life. It might be something different. It's your understanding. And if you have one concept, of religion, and you're closed-minded against all of the others, that's not a good place to be. These steps, are very, different, and we're not trying to make them difficult. They're only difficult for closed-minded. Be open-minded. So you can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We know what belligerent denial looks like. We find that no one had difficulty with the spirituality of the program. People always say I'm doing the spiritual part of the program. What is the spiritual part of the program? The steps. What is the spiritual part of the steps? Well, here's a secret I'm going to tell all you. There's no spiritual part. They're all spiritual. Some people say step one's not spiritual. How can step one not be spiritual? It's about, admitting you're powerless. It's a spiritual part. So here's the how, or you can call it the who, whatever. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. Honesty, open-mindedness, willingness. The indispensable. So willingness means to be ready. To be ready. To do something. And how is it demonstrated? By action. Right? Honesty, as I mentioned, is awareness of where I'm at, self-honesty. Am I powerless over alcohol? Is my life still consumed by resentment? Does fear drive my thinking? And so on. Am I willing to let go of my own self? Am I willing to accept new terms to live by? Open-mindedness is to consider someone's opinion other than my own. I mentioned that. Can you consider someone else's opinion other than your own? Do you constantly judge others? Essential means necessary. Essential means necessary. Keep it, your mind open. So think about that for a second. Most honesty and mind are essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. So essential means necessary. Recovery means restore to health. Indispensable means unavoidable. So what they're saying here is this: being ready, knowing where I'm at, and to consider someone's opinion other than my own are necessary to be restored to health. That is the how. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And we are going to stop right there and do some discussion. Just give me 1 second to turn off the recording.